In October of 2025, the United States government was shut down by the Speaker of the House. Military and government employees went unpaid, and food aid to millions of hungry citizens remained frozen. On the other side of the Atlantic, King Charles of the United Kingdom announced that his brother, Andrew, had been formally stripped of his royal titles, would be evicted from his home, and would now be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. What these global events have in common is their link to the Jeffrey Epstein files, the extensive dossier of information compiled by prosecutors to track his international sex trafficking. These records confirm an astonishingly large number of rich and powerful men abused children and teenage girls they obtained through Jeffrey Epstein and his convicted co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. The late Virginia Roberts Giuffre has been associated with the investigation around Epstein longer than almost anyone. It was a photo of her, with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's arm around her waist and Maxwell looking on, that first awakened the world to Epstein's sex trafficking network. In it, one sees a very young girl thrust into a circle of power and control she could barely comprehend, let alone escape. This video is not for everyone. It dives deep into one survivor's intimate and detailed account of how she was repeatedly raped and abused by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and a host of other powerful people associated with them. It is also her story of fighting back against abuse and exposing their crimes. Potentially very triggering, especially to survivors of abuse, her story is an unflinching look at how twisted even the law can become when the rich and powerful are involved. If you have ever struggled to understand how those who have been abused or trafficked for sex end up in that situation, or why they stay trapped for so long, there is a consistent answer. They were first abused at home. Growing up with violence, addiction, neglect, or abuse makes individuals far more likely to form families as adults that mimic the dynamic of their childhood home. When children associate the love of their parents with violence or betrayal or abuse, that perception sets them up for a lifetime of accepting abuse as love. Virginia Roberts, known to her family as Jenna, grew up in Loxahatchee, Florida, surrounded by her family, including Mom Lynn, Dad Sky, stepbrother Danny, and younger brother Skydie. Her grandma was not far away in Palm Beach. Their rural, fixer-upper house was surrounded by nature, with sunflowers planted in the front garden. At the age of 6, she was given a horse and had the freedom to wander and grow the way kids always did in rural places, climbing trees and splashing through creeks. She couldn't know that her home life would soon become anything but normal. It began when Jenna was about 7 years old. Evening bath and bedtime routines had always been bonding time with her mom. Then one day, Mom was too busy. Despite Jenna's protests, Dad told her to strip naked and get into the bath. Something in her knew this was strange. As she hid herself under the bubbles, he insisted she stand up and proceeded to rub her with his hands in places she insisted she could wash herself. Soon he was creeping into her bedroom at night, molesting her and violating her in ways that left her devastated and confused. She told everyone in her family she no longer wanted hugs or baths or story time. She even hid in the extra space of her box spring one night under the mattress. But he just dragged her out. Soon, Dad was asking for her to touch him, and worse, sending her off with one of his male friends to be abused by him too. Dad threatened to kill her younger brother if she told anyone. Lynn Roberts witnessed her bright daughter become a shell of herself, start to fail in school, and withdraw. Mom took her to many appointments for the persistent urinary infections and increasing incontinence that plagued Jenna during her school years, becoming known as the pee girl among her classmates. When doctors observed that Jenna's hymen had been broken, her mother was quick to blame the bareback horse riding. Jenna even remembers the bedroom door creaking open slightly, late one night, and Mom peeking in as her father molested her. Rejoicing inside that at last her mother would burst in and protect her, something died in young Jenna's spirit when the door quietly shut again a few moments later. No one was coming to save her. Entering teenage years is a perilous time for girls, even under the best of circumstances. For girls growing up who have been repeatedly violated and abused, it is often catastrophic. For Jenna, it meant she started staying out late, skipping school, experimenting with drugs and boys. Then, around age 13, she got raped in the back of a car for hours by two older teenagers. The boys were caught, but the local police knew that she had drunk alcohol and smoked pot with her rapists, and so claimed she had consented. Instead of the offenders getting punished, Jenna was sent off to a rehabilitation camp for out-of-control teens. There, the abuse only increased. The facility was marketed as a tough love treatment center, but was eventually shut down for widespread abuse. She ran away over and over, and eventually made it all the way to Miami, Florida. At 15, she was picked up by a young man who insisted he was going her way, only to be violently raped at gunpoint for hours before she could escape. Alone, penniless, and bleeding from every orifice after a near life-ending assault, Jenna was sitting on a curb crying when a dark limousine pulled up. Inside was an old man and a young girl. They spoke kindly, wondering why she was crying all alone. They enticed her into the back of the limousine, promising a career with his modeling agency. With no other options in sight, Jenna got in. When the old man, named Ron Eppinger, insisted she sleep naked with him, became sexually violent, and made her walk around his lavish home naked with other underage girls, it was hardly a change from life thus far. Being violated, controlled, and raped had become second nature. Jenna adapted. She started popping Xanax, which would become a long-term habit, and whatever else could get to numb the pain. After 6 months, Eppinger gave Jenna to a friend against her will. She was now literally a sex slave. But the FBI was on Eppinger's tail, and when her abuser was raided, she was sent back home. Her parents called her a whore and damaged goods, so when she went off to live with the brother of someone she met at the youth rehab facility, they were relieved to be rid of her. A short time later, Jenna's dad recommended her for a job. He was working as a groundskeeper at Mar-a-Lago, the famed golf resort and club owned by President Donald Trump. It was early on in her time working for Mar-a-Lago that Ghislaine Maxwell sidled up to the desk where Jenna was working and introduced herself. A striking and glamorous figure, she asked Jenna about herself and what she wanted to do with her life, showing real interest. When Jenna replied that she wanted to become a massage therapist, Maxwell brightened. Ghislaine happened to know a rich and handsome man looking for a masseuse right now. No experience necessary, handsomely remunerated. It was with a spirit of optimism that Jenna agreed to accompany Maxwell that evening to the house of Jeffrey Epstein to see about this opportunity. Jenna couldn't help hoping that life was falling into place at last, but sadly, it was falling into great darkness. When she stepped into Jeffrey Epstein's pink Palm Beach mansion on El Brillo Way as a 16-year-old, Jenna Roberts could hardly have known the horrifying circumstances it would lead to, nor the years of suffering she would endure. Maxwell led her to a lavish room in the mansion with a massage table, and Jeffrey Epstein stepped into the room in only a towel. Both he and Maxwell encouraged Jenna to rub the naked Epstein more and more intimately, and even in this first session forced sexual contact with her. Disoriented and confused, Jenna had $200 thrust into her hands, was given back her Mar-a-Lago uniform, and was dropped off at home by the butler with a promise that she would return again tomorrow. Feeling that she had no choice but to do what the rich and powerful people told her, Jenna complied. It wasn't long before Epstein told her to quit her job and come work for him. He paid for the apartment where she lived with her boyfriend and paid all her bills, and all she needed to do in return was to be at his beck and call. Only years later would she learn that her father likely received a payout for bringing Jenna to Mar-a-Lago, effectively profiting from his daughter's trafficking, an accusation he vehemently denies. But his years of abuse had prepared her perfectly for Epstein and Maxwell, who recognized that she had no one protecting her and no sense of self-worth or boundaries. Soon, they were letting Epstein and Maxwell's rich friends rape Jenna as well, telling her to do for Epstein's friends what she did for him. Countless politicians, academics, scientists, and other prominent figures became her regular abusers, including one prime minister who raped her so violently she almost died. Meanwhile, Epstein thought himself a mentor to young Jenna, frequently telling her how special she was and how he was looking after her interests. He and Maxwell became de facto parents, offering Jenna at once the chance to be seen and appreciated while abusing her viciously when it suited them. Living with the cognitive dissonance of sexual abuse was something Jenna understood from a young age, and so she tried to carry on. Meeting then Prince Andrew was particularly memorable for a girl who never expected to travel, much less meet a prince. Years later, photos of Jenna at Naomi Campbell's birthday party would come to light, taken by another guest. In them, it is obvious that she was a young teenager surrounded by men who were looking at her as if they were entitled to her body. It was also clear that Jenna did not look happy, because when the cognitive dissonance is this acute, it's only a matter of time before something breaks down. Jeffrey Epstein liked young girls, so when Jenna was 16, he considered her special. As the years went by and she turned more and more to drugs to cope, he was less attentive. Jenna could also see Ghislaine's anxiety over her own aging, knowing Epstein's predilection for youth. Maxwell took these feelings out on Jenna during their threesomes, often hurting her with sex toys to take revenge. Epstein also developed an interest in BDSM and began physically abusing Jenna during their sexual encounters. He enjoyed her fear that he might kill her. Meanwhile, her own body was breaking down. When she needed to be rushed to the hospital for an ectopic pregnancy when she was still underage, doctors never spoke to her with Epstein out of the room. No mandated reporting happened either. When Jenna was just 19, having spent 3 years being trafficked internationally, Epstein finally offered to send her to a prestigious massage school in Thailand. She was also tasked with tracking down a particularly young Thai girl to bring her back for Epstein. Still, sensing her chance, Jenna began organizing herself to flee. At first, she enjoyed her courses, befriended other students, and made excuses for not finding the young girl. For the first time in her life, she could pursue her interests and breathe free. One evening, she accompanied a friend to a martial arts event in town. There she spotted a very handsome Australian in the group and couldn't take her eyes off of him. Robbie and Jenna exchanged numbers and within days were dating seriously. As if the pressure of a lifetime were finally bursting, she told him everything on the first date. He had been curious about how a young woman could afford the expensive massage school and fancy hotel, and this certainly answered that question. When he became enraged at what he heard, Jenna felt as though she had found someone who could take her away from what she had become. Just 10 days after meeting, Robbie and Jenna went to a local temple and were married. Meanwhile, Maxwell's daily calls had gone unanswered. Finally, Epstein himself called and Jenna simply blurted out the news. She had fallen in love and gotten married. Epstein hung up the phone. At just 19 years old, with no education, an addiction to Xanax and recreational drugs, no family, and no means of support with Epstein's money transfers ending, she was now faced with digging herself out of a very deep, dark hole. But as luck would have it, her new husband was an Aussie. The two soon headed off to sunny Australia to make a new life. This is the part in most fairy tales where the story ends. The fair maiden has been rescued and found her handsome prince. Happily ever after time. But life isn't a fairy tale, and so Jenna's story was just beginning. First, she had to grow up. She'd never cooked or cleaned for herself, paid a bill, or balanced a budget. She was an actual child who was addicted to powerful drugs. Slowly, patiently, her new family taught her, and it wasn't long before she was building a family of her own. But that didn't stop her past from resurfacing. In the traumatic memories that popped up constantly, the difficulty she had being intimate during sex with her husband, and the looming threat of Epstein and Maxwell resurfacing somehow. Australia felt like 1,000,000 miles away from her old life, but that didn't mean she was safe. It did give her the mental distance to know that what had happened to her was still happening to others. And now, as a mother, this knowledge was becoming intolerable. In 2008, she filed her first lawsuit as Jane Doe, known as the Crime Victims' Rights Act lawsuit. After discovering that Epstein had reached a plea deal with prosecutors which amounted to a slap on the wrist, Jenna challenged that her victims' rights had been violated. Filed by attorneys Bradley Edwards and Paul Cassell, the suit also allowed her to contact other victims, something that would become important later on. In 2009, together with dozens of other victims, she filed a lawsuit against Epstein and Maxwell. She settled for a modest amount in 2009, but it allowed her family to buy a home and feel a sense of stability. But when, in 2010, she gave birth to a daughter, Ellie, she realized she needed to do more to stop Epstein and his ilk from getting away with what they were doing. She went public about her story in the Daily Mail in March of 2011, along with the now famous image of her with Andrew and Ghislaine. She was deposed in 2014 in Florida, openly for the 2008 lawsuit, choosing to go public with her name. By 2014, she had also launched a charity in the U.S. called Victims Refuse Silence. In 2018, she filed a lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell for claiming that she was never trafficked, a claim that opened Maxwell up to prosecution for defamation. Case after case, lawsuit after lawsuit, Jenna grew more empowered as her fight against her abusers grew. Between 2020 and 2022, she filed suits against Andrew Windsor and Jean-Luc Brunel, two of her most public and prolific abusers. She relaunched her charity as Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, or SOAR for victims of trafficking and sex crimes. She even used the funds from settlements with Andrew to support their operations. Modern fairy tales might end here. The princess was rescued, fought back against her enemies, brought down their mighty empires, and then lived happily ever after as a total badass. But this isn't that kind of fairy tale either. It is the story of a real woman who was born and lived her life as best she could and then died by suicide at the age of just 41. She was already in physical and mental trouble by that point, having endured so much torture from such a young age. By now, she had broken her neck in a fall and needed 2 surgeries. Yet the neck injury caused chronic pain. Then in early March of 2025, she was in a car accident when a vehicle she was riding in was hit by a bus. Initially believed to have only minor injuries, she went into organ failure and was posting on Twitter about being given only days to live just weeks later. In the months leading up to her death, she had become estranged from her husband, Robert, and rumors had begun circulating from many witnesses who claimed he was physically abusive to her throughout their marriage. An altercation between them during their separation had led to Robbie getting a protective order against her, effectively cutting her off from her children. But glimpses of his abuse pepper her recollections. The quick rescue, the social isolation, the ways in which Jenna idolized Robbie in her prose, all show marked signs of a victim trapped in a cycle of abuse that she could not escape. But her constant advocacy for other victims and the responsibility she took for the part she played in the abuse of others are also clear. She worked until her last breath to ensure what happened to her wouldn't happen to her daughter or anyone else's. With 2 former abusers also dying by suicide in prison, and Maxwell serving a decades-long sentence in a Texas prison, she accomplished much. In interviews after their sister's passing, Jenna's brothers expressed their unwavering support for their sister and their belief in every one of her claims of abuse in their family, claims her father continues to deny. But he is far, far away from his granddaughter in Australia and hasn't had contact with his other grandchildren in years. So little Jenna's wish to protect others from her father's abuse has succeeded, at least in the next generation of her own family, even if the rest of the Epstein story is yet to unfold.